Let's start this podcast by just introducing yourself because I just realized that you were not from China. And I was
Mm.
like, math strength. And you're not like the guy who's taking the place on the photos. You're not showing yourself that much on the social media. You're really into the work, I think, more than the photos.
I am. So I'm the founder of Ma Strength. And the characters from Ma Strength, the Chinese characters, it means horsepower. So
Okay.
horse strength. So
Okay.
that's why there's a horse in the logo. And so and the reason I don't show myself too much on the camera is because I'm usually the person taking the video. I'm usually behind the
Okay.
camera. And so in order for me to show what I want to show, I have to, record videos or take photos in a certain angle or certain way so that it's more instructive. Otherwise, if you can go on many weightlifting accounts and you're going to see a lot of the same kind of footage. You'll see the 45-degree angle or the side view. And for what I do, you need to look at the top, you need to look at the front, you need to look at the back. So it's very difficult to communicate this to anybody else. And since I've been traveling to China, I've had my phone, I've had my camera, and I've just been behind. So I express myself through my writing, and I let that do the work.
Okay. Okay. And can you explain us just briefly about your career path? What leads you to China? What leads you to weightlifting?
Yeah. So I used to be a gymnast in high school, and then I got too tall for that after puberty, and so I needed to find another sport. And in college, I tried to uh, go into diving, but diving was very difficult for me because I spent many years landing on my feet, and diving requires you to land on your face to enter the water. So I didn't last long in diving. I was not very successful. So then I said, okay, well, let me try and just get strong because I was very thin, and light, which is good for gymnastics and diving. But I was interested in getting stronger and getting bigger. So I started researching into bodybuilding and just how to gain muscle. And in that process, I realized I enjoyed getting stronger, and I actually enjoyed perfecting the lifts, getting good at certain lifts. And so I was uh, dabbling in powerlifting, but eventually I saw a weightlifting poster of Piros Dimas,
Mm.
and it was from the Iron Mind company, and it's a black and white poster. He's posing like this, with like saying number one. He's got a barbell that's loaded with weight, and he's got six pack abs. He's got a very hard look to his body, and I saw that and said, that looks really cool. That's what I want to achieve, because I realized that the way my body structure is, I'm never going to be a very successful bodybuilder, and um, I was not going to be a big power lifter. So, but weightlifting looked more realistic, more achievable. So I wanted to research that, and then I started watching the DVDs from the Iron Mind company at the time because there was no weightlifting social media. There's very little information online, and uh, this company was taking videos of various world championships, and backroom training halls. And that's where I learned about weightlifting. And I tried to emulate what I saw, but the subjects were mainly European lifters, and there was a huge variety in their techniques, and there was no analysis of what they were doing. So all you could do was just observe and try to copy. Um, one year he put out a DVD with the Chinese team because the World Championships were in China that year, and I noticed that that team was doing things differently from any other world team, and they were doing things that looked very similar amongst their athletes. There was not a lot of variety in their movement patterns. So I realized I didn't know what the difference was, but I knew that there was a difference. So after watching that DVD, I was very motivated to learn about weightlifting, and it just coincided at a time in my life where I was going to go to China for studying abroad in university. So I was going to study Chinese language and culture, which I did, and I took that interest of weightlifting with me as well. And I started talking to people who were also interested in the sport, and eventually I connected with some researchers, sports scientists, and about my interest in weightlifting. And eventually I was able to go to the national training base in Beijing. And in talking with researchers and some of the coaches there, they kept referencing articles and books, because I had many questions, and they were able to answer it, saying, that they have studied this or they researched that, and this is why they do the things that they do. And so then I asked, where are those resources? Where are those articles? And they said, well, they're all in Chinese. But since you speak Chinese, since you can read Chinese, here you go. And so I started studying these materials, and then being, in university, I was able to, go to the library, go through databases, and start researching further about Chinese weightlifting. And I started studying that for a long time, and I didn't look back. Because everything there made sense. It was very. They had a process for their methodology, which I felt was lacking when I was trying to learn by myself or just trying to learn in the USA.
Okay. And how did you digest all this information? And that was not even your mother language. So how you get to that? How long does it take to just ingest so much information?
Well, I studied the language, so that was what helped me translate a lot of this information.
Do you know a lot of people that are talking Chinese in USA? Because in France,
at the time,
I'm still looking for.
At the time, no. So one of the reasons I wanted to go to Asia for studying abroad is because most of my friends were going to Europe, and I love Europe, but I wanted something different. And I've always been interested in Asian culture. So it just worked out that China was the opportunity that was presented through my university. And so I went there, and I was really excited, and I went a long time without speaking English, just so that I could learn Chinese. So by the end of my studies, I was starting to dream in Chinese, which was really wild, because I didn't speak, read, or write any other language other than Chinese. And so by the end of my time there, I was starting to think and dream in Chinese.
That's massive.
Yeah. So it makes the translations a lot easier as well. Sure. And I use Google Translate like everybody else, but it's a little bit quicker for me to understand, what's being said.
To talk about the upcoming seminar in France. What are the main points you can talk about when you talk about technique? When you get to that China atmosphere, what was the most impactful for your techniques, for your view for your point of view into techniques, into weightlifting?
Well, what I liked about the technique in China was there was a reasoning for everything that they did, and it was very exact. So for me, that was useful, because coming from a gymnastics background, the instruction there is also very exact. So a coach might have different cues or a different way of explaining things, but they all follow the same principles. So if you want to perform a backflip, you have to follow the physics of the movement in order to land on your feet. Otherwise, you won't be successful. So the principles that they were following were very similar. Whereas when I was trying to learn in the USA, you know, the technique differed based on the opinions of the coach. So some coaches would say, your balance needs to be near the forefoot. Others would say it needs to be near the heel. Others would say it needs to be in the middle. And there was very little explanation as to why these differences existed. So being an athlete, I realized that something was missing. And when I went to China, they would say, no, your balance needs to be here. And it's here because this is where you're going to finish. This is where you need to extend. And this is going to set you in a good position to get under the bar. So, so every time I had a question, there was an answer. There was never just an opinion. There was a reason, and there was research behind the answers.
Were you practicing weightlifting at that time still? On yourself, still practicing that methodology?
Yes.
And so talking about that, the starting point, for example, what have you changed in compared to your previous years into weightlifting?
Well, previously I was guessing. I was guessing where my position should be, because I know, a lot of coaches would say you have to do what feels good to you, or you have to follow your own technique or your own style. And whereas in China, they say, no, you need to extend, and you need some plantar flexion during the extension. And if you want to maximize that, the force generated by that plantar flexion, you need to start in this particular location. So now, when I set up for weightlifting, I know exactly where I have to be. There's no guessing involved, and all I have to do is maintain, kind of record the feeling and try to replicate the feeling every time. But if I ever feel lost, there are strategies to ensure that I'm in the right location.
Would you explain for the people that's going to watch that podcast, what is plantar flexion?
So plantar flexion is when, your foot, when your heel leaves the ground, when you're, flexing through the foot, your foot is off the ground and you're balanced over the ball of the foot.
Okay. And that's the question, because I heard the idea that was just the result of your extension at the hips and the knees. And some connected. Say no, that's because you're pushing to the end with the feet. What's your view?
It's all connected.
Yeah.
So, in China, the view is, is from the ground up. So your foot balance is going to determine how the rest of your body will organize to get into position. So if you don't have the proper foot contacts, then everything that's on top of your foot, which is your body, will have to compensate in some way. So I don't think you can differentiate between the hips and the feet because they're connected. So it's just a matter of, do you have the correct foot contacts, and then will the rest of the body follow?
Okay. And my questions, and we already talked about that before in private session, but how do you manage to work with different coaches and different body type now you leave Asia? Because they look all really big and really quite dominant, really strong into that ankle flexion that we are not always easy with. So if I can talk like that, we are not all happy with the ankle. So how you manage that difference in body types?
Well, I would counter that. For example, if you look at the Chinese women, China has won gold medals in every weight class that they send a woman, whether you're 48 kilos or super heavyweights. Yeah. And I guarantee I've met many world champions from China, and there is a big difference in the body type between a 48 kilo girl and a super heavyweight athlete who probably weighs 130 kilos or so. So those body types are different, but they're all following the same principles. And I think that is what makes this style so effective. And I find it easier to teach and easier to learn, because now if you follow the principles, my goal, you will have a successful result. So my goal is not to make you look like a certain athlete. It's for you to follow these principles so that you can maximize your force production.
Okay. Do you think people try to mimic too much instead of following principle during weightlifting class?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone has their reasons.
Yeah.
But I know that when I teach these principles and people follow, it does become easier, and they're able to minimize a lot of compensatory strategies so that they can maximize their force production. So, like I said, for a lot of people, they find that it's very easy to learn.
Okay. Talking about that seminar, can you explain what people's gonna find into that seminar, the first one?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're coming to France, so
yeah. So this is my first time in France, to do a seminar in France, and I'm very excited. And so this will be the level 1 mass strength seminar, where I teach the learning progression for the snatch and clean and jerk. So it's a 2-day seminar, and the first day will be snatch, the second day will be clean and jerk, and we're going to go over the teaching progression for each of those lifts. So these movements are technical movements that build up to the full lift from the ground up. And if you can do these lifts, you'll be able to do many other accessory movements. So just for example, people will learn the start position, people will learn how to do a snatch deadlift. And if you can do a snatch deadlift properly in this style, you will be able to do hang snatches, because a hang snatch is basically a partial deadlift with a snatch. So you'll be able to do many movements even after the seminar by applying these technical movements that are covered over the 2 days.
Okay. And what are the subject that you cover during that 2-day seminar? When we are talking about that 2 main movements, what do you want the people to focus on?
So, people will focus on their balance, and they'll focus on their breathing, because, if you cannot manage your internal pressure, then you're going to have to use a compensatory strategy to organize yourself. And if you can't maintain your balance, then again, you're going to compensate somehow, and it will throw off your movement. So okay, the biggest issue will be how to set up the movement properly from the start position, and then how to maintain it through the entire excursion of the movement.
Okay. Let's talk about that starting position. You've done how many seminars have you done already?
I've done over 100 seminars over the past few years.
If you have to talk about the 3 mistakes that you are looking at all the time, like all the seminars you're giving, like no, but they all do the same. They all starting in that same position. Why that? Do you have some mistakes like that are recurrent? I don't know if we use that that word in English.
Yeah, so I think the first step is finding out where to put the bar, where to allocate the bar over your foot. So again, few people put time into analyzing exactly where it should be. So they already start from an unclear position. Sometimes people will roll the bar, and they'll move the bar before they start, or they move their body back and forth. And so then they, whenever they feel ready, then they start the lift, but they don't focus on or feel where their balance is in the start position. And these lifts are like a rocket. If you don't aim properly, then that rocket is going to can go in any direction, and we want it to go in as vertical direction as possible. So the the big emphasis in the seminar is in the start position, because if you don't have a good start, it will be very difficult for you to try to save it during the lift, because these lifts happen in under a second. So you don't have the time to adjust.
When you are talking about that rocket, people who wants to avoid that sometimes just take a straight position, avoiding the power of the hips. Is that something you deal with too?
I've seen a lot of compensatory strategies, but you know, I go into it with the reasoning that I learned. So people learn from different schools, or they read something on the internet, and I'm available to answer questions. But I don't compare schools, because, for example, like I'm not a Russian coach. I haven't been trained in Russia. I read about it, but I'm not an expert on it. So when people say, "Oh, the Russians do this," I say, "Well, okay, but this is the Chinese style. This is the reasoning why it's used in China. This is what this is," and so that is the scope of my response. If you want to learn another school, that's fine, but this is the way it's done here. So that's what I go with.
Can understand. And talking about other school, was it true that you train with ABJF?
I did for a short time, yeah. When I was in California.
In California, okay. How was it?
It was great. He's not with us anymore, but he was very funny. He is very serious, but he had a really good sense of humor, and he had a really good talent for getting you to work hard. I think one of the things I learned from him is how much training my body can handle. I would not have done that kind of training by myself, but I did. I told him, I said, I'd like to train with you, and I will do whatever you say. So if you tell me, to squat a certain bar, even if I don't think I can make it, I will try. So I remember one time, I was I cleaned 160 kilos, and it was, at the time, it was a personal record for me, and he was all about trying to set those new personal bests, and I said it. I did it, and then I looked at him and I said, "More?" And he's like, "No, no more today." I said, "Okay." I said, "But just so you know, if you tell me to put 200 on the bar, I'll try. I don't think I can do 200, but I will try." So so that's how it was with him. So I learned how far I could take my body. It was very, because I've read about overtraining and overreaching and whatnot, but he just had different views on adaptation and how much workload the body could take. So
because that's the hardest things, that we never know from people. If you met him, so what that Bulgarian style could look like, but people just talk about myth, talk about legend there, and we don't know what is true, what is false. So it's always good to meet people and said, okay, you've been there, so what about that guy? What about his training session? So that was tough. That was hard on that intensity.
Oh, it was very hard. But you do specialize in the movements. I don't train like that anymore. And it does require, a professional lifestyle for weightlifting. That's for sure.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to do if you have other stresses or other things that take your time,
Yeah.
just because there's you're training full time basically. But it was fun. It was
I can
fun. I got
imagine.
real strong. I got very strong over that time.
Well,
But
160 is quite strong, I think. Like starting to
we
get like,
you know, so I had dinner once with Jun, and at the time, he was asking me about my lifts, and at the time, I had snatched 132, and
yeah,
he was asking me, he's like, oh, how much can you snatch? And I said, oh, about 132, and he's like, it's pretty good. It's not bad. I said, you power
yeah,
snatch that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was like, don't patronize me. I was like, you can snatch 170.
But
Yes, I snatch what you power snatch.
you were
So
talking to the best of the best. So
100%. So
yeah,
I laughed, and he laughed as well. But it was, I said, yeah, don't worry. I do what young kids in China do.
yeah.
So
Uh, talking about your seminar and
mm,
talking about the books
mm.
you just edited. I got one there. I think that's Matt Strength's Chinese weightlifting method, and you did some others.
So I have a black book that I'll bring to the seminar as well. So I have some French copies,
Yeah,
and I can show you a screenshot of that real quick. So this book uh, is it's an illustrated guide to technique. So
mm,
I talk about how to approach these lifts using the Chinese style, and I talk about some common errors that people encounter, and then some suggestions just based on my training experience and in teaching people this style. So, for example, if you look here, this is how beginners in China will learn where to put the bar. So they will measure this distance from the shin to allocate the bar over the ball of the foot. And there is a certain way to measure it. As you can see, you don't want your shins to be inclined back like a stiff-legged deadlift, and you also don't want to squat down like this, because then the bar will be too far away from you when you start the lift. So there's an exact location, and there's a way to measure this. And then as you progress, you go from the ground up. You want to maintain contact with the barbell, and so forth and so forth. So this book is a good guide for people who are training by themselves, or if you're a coach and you see something that's off and you're not quite sure what to do about it. So this book will tell you, what the error is, why they should use this style, and some training strategies to make sure that to ensure this result. So it's a very practical book. It's mainly pictures. It's mainly like one page of text and then one page of pictures, as you
mm.
can see, and it's in French. So I don't know how many weightlifting books there are in French, but
Not that much, I promise.
so it says this one is one of them. So it's a good guide. Like I said, very practical, and it's a good resource for people who are training by themselves, or they're just a little unsure and they need some guidance.
For a guy like
Mm,
you've been coaching, I don't know how many hours of weightlifting session. So you get what we call that eyes that there's a manga. I don't know if you've been interested in the comics and manga. There's
mm,
a name for that is called Naruto. Is named the Sharingan. Will
mm,
like
yeah,
it's like you've been watching everything in the slow mo,
yes.
but
His eyes get red.
yeah, but for you, I can imagine that it's just like a boom, and then you get the cues, you get the correction for the people you are training. For young coaches over there, and as you get the coaches to the seminar, and I just want to say that it's not only for coaches, if I'm not mistaken, for the first one.
Right. So this seminar is good for athletes and for coaches, because not only will you learn how to lift, but you'll learn how to teach.
Yeah. And will you recommend for that young coaches and to develop that eye connection, to start to film some session and then to just look at precisely on the slow motion on their own? Because looking at the pictures, yes, it's a picture, and that's so easy to figure it out. Now I'm looking at the good pictures and the wrong pictures. I know what you're talking about. But when it's time to lift and people are lifting in front of you, sometimes you just get too fast. The knee is fast, and you're like, oh, what's happened to that? So what are your recommendations for the coaches?
Well, so during the seminar, I'll teach people, some key points to look at, and where these compensatory strategies may appear. So, I do give them some strategies and about what to look for. And then, as you've seen in my stories, I've been posting some of my own observations, looking at these lifts in a different way. That's more for my level 2 seminar, where I teach you how to look at the lifts in another way, so that you can then make better guesses, because it's always a guess, about how to correct a certain a movement. So this first seminar is basically teaching you how to lift and why the style works the way it does. The second level teaches you how it furthers your ability to analyze these lifts, and then teaches you how to make better training decisions.
Okay. Talking about that level 2 seminar, that's the first thing that came to my mind. I was looking at your story, and I was like, wow, that's brilliant. Like, I had no ideas of what was going on into that lift, and then you put the answer, and I was like, but that looked like pattern I know, and sometimes it looks like pattern people are going against, like shoulder retraction to for all the lifts, extending that upper thoracic extension at the upper thoracic part. How you came to that level 2 seminar? Because it looked like it's really technical.
It's very technical. So I've watched a lot of weightlifting, and over 20 years. I've been watching weightlifting competitions, not just from China, but also from world championships, regional championships. And, over time, you look at what's going on social media, and, there's always a limited scope of analysis, and that just we're not able to capture the what's going on. And I think that's been exacerbated more with the entrance of a lot of PTs that are coming into to weightlifting. So they come with their perspective, but I find that there's a disjunction, I believe, with the model that they're using to analyze these lifts and what is actually occurring during these lifts. So their entrance highlighted the necessity for me to go further and to look at these lifts a little bit more critically, and review the patterns of movements that I've been observing for a long time. So,
do you get just a few examples of that? Just one or two photos that you were working on and explaining to people what you are looking at? Because I saw one with the retraction. I was like, wow, that's outstanding.
For the you say retraction?
Yeah, and all that rotation of the left part of the body from the upper and
Oh,
lower body from the starting
mhm.
position. And you were talking also to me about a girl that you were coaching and that was struggling with her lift. Her lift. Yep.
Sure. So I'll show you the girl first, just because
Yep.
it's
Sure.
a more clear example. So let me see. So this is a client that I was working with online. So the left image is the before, and then the right image is the after. So
Mm.
this was what her split jerk looked like. Now,
Okay.
I try to do the minimal amount necessary to make technical changes. So I don't like, recommending a ton of, mobility exercises or stretches or foam rolling or whatever to try to get a result. If I can make just a technical correction or a technical reminder to get the result, that's great.
Okay.
So in this case, however, this was her split jerk, and she physically could not get her back leg behind her, as in the green, as in this photo, and she was also experiencing knee pain
Mm.
um, during the jerk. So um, so I noticed, that, I mean, this is, if you look at her clothing, you can see this line here through this is the seam of her pants. This is a twist in the leg. Her leg is turned. And so and you can see her body as well. She's not facing forward. Her body is turning to the right. So if you understand the pressure management of the thorax, and how that replicates itself, in the extremities, it becomes a lot easier to create a strategy to resolve this issue. So she's turned to the right. So the basic strategy was to turn her to the left, and get her squared away. So I used some exercises that and some breathing techniques to help her access that position, and then because she didn't have to compensate by twisting her leg, then the knee pain started to resolve itself. So the end result is what you see here on the right, where now she was able to move that back leg, her leg behind her, and uh, align herself more towards the front. But
Yes.
I'll tell you, it's like you have to have a good model for analyzing this, because if you don't have a good model, you're not going to get good results. So um, let's see. I had just to tell you a story. I had one athlete who was she was deadlifting, and she was also shifting her to the right, and so the right side of the barbell was lower than the left,
Yeah.
and so she was thinking that uh, because she was pushing towards the right, her left side, the left side of her left leg was what she interpreted it as caving in, and then her right leg was looked normal. So she attributed that to, having weak glutes, weak TFL, weak whatever muscle, name one, it's fine.
Yeah.
But those strategies that she was using was pushing her further to the right. So she was doing these strategies and she wasn't getting the result. And she was still experiencing the pain, either in her lower back or in her knee. And so when I told her, I said, these strategies are pushing you further to the right. It's not the muscle, it's your direction. Then she she was open to changing her foot contacts and trying a few things that would shift her to the left. And in that case, she was able to resolve the unevenness of the barbell, but she was also able to lift heavier without pain.
Okay.
So, but she was looking at it from a she was looking at it as a lateral issue, rather than uh, a rotation, rather than a turn. So I think that's one of the defining characteristics, especially in the level 2, is to get away from straight plane thinking. So instead of thinking of sagittal plane, frontal plane, whatever, Just think in 3D. It's all a turn. Everything is turning, and if you understand how the joints are turning and where they need to be, then the strategies become more clear.
I like this conversation because we've been, and especially in CrossFit, from a point of performance in squats, we get into that cue called knees out for no reason at any moment of the squat, leading you to a two-dimension squat for the knees. And people sometimes don't understand that everything is created through an ellipse. Like looking at the guys at the basketball jumping, that was a James Harden strength and conditioning coach talking in the podcast about the way that people get that knee slightly inside, this slight variation of the tibia getting inward. We're using it as a jumping mechanism. They were jumping higher because of that knees slightly coming into the daily life. Like they are made like that. They are built like that, and they're using it as a whip, from the inside to the outside to jump. When we are looking at the Chinese weightlifter doing the back squat series, knees caving it, and then they're getting out of the hole, and it's a different movement then. So I'm always wondering what was the vision of the Chinese weightlifter about the squat. Because if you look at the USA powerlifters coach, they're always talking about that knees out, but that's a short range of motion compared to weightlifter.
Right. So, if you, everything that we do is a turn, is a type of rotation, and how you rotate is based on your own helical angle. And that's something that you're given by your parents. So, not everyone jumps the same way. Not everyone lifts the same way, but if we follow the same principles, we can maximize our jumping ability. So, in terms of a squat, you have to create a space, and then you have to produce force within that space. If the space is too big, and then you can't produce enough force, then you don't go anywhere. So, moving the knees out will create a large space, but it also will reduce your ability to go deeper. Because if you're always expanding, it becomes difficult to produce force. So, once you pass, as you go into a deeper squat, you need internal rotation in the femur to get, or in the lower extremity in general, to get into that deep position. So, powerlifting is a different sport. So they're not trying to squat as deep as possible. They're just trying to squat to the regulation. So their strategy is going to be different than the strategy needed for a weightlifter. So I also I think there's something to learn from them, because they do get strong, but at the same time, we can't use the same cues all the time or use them as absolutes, because yes, even in weightlifting, you need to create space to get into the squat, but you don't want to create so much space that you limit the excursion of the movement.
Yeah. Remember that Louis Simons was talking about that when he was talking about, because he get pretty interested in weightlifting. I was surprised.
Yeah, he actually bought my book, he liked it.
That was a great name. That was a great.
Yeah, he wrote a good note about my book. And after that, I was very very moved, because I grew up reading a lot of the West Side articles, because that was one of the few resources when I started, getting into strength training in general. So again, there was no Facebook, no YouTube, no Instagram, nothing, but he was posting articles, in the early 2000s about how to get stronger. And so, I would read them, and there were a few pictures as well. So you just had to read this stuff. But I learned a lot about strength training through him, and so to have him read my book and 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 compliment it, it
Yeah,
it was very surreal.
I can imagine that. But
But
yeah, that's one thing. That's well deserved thing.
mhm.
Um, talking about your book and your view of that weightlifting training, how will you compare men's versus women into training that weight?
So women's training tends to have more volume, tends to have smaller increments in between sets, but they tend to do more sets,
Okay,
and they can still train heavy, just like men, but they can maintain their intensity over a longer period, and they can do longer training cycles as well. So in, in most uh, in most cases, women are able to do more than men, and they're able to do it for longer. But that also means that they need longer recovery, and so their training cycles, tend to be longer, but also have a longer tapering period. And then there's always the issue with menstruation, to see how that impacts the athlete, and that's a conversation you need to have with the individual to see how it affects their performance, and then it can help you determine whether you need to adjust the training during a certain week of the month, so that they feel good and that they're able to perform at their best. So some women don't need any adjustment. Some women feel strong throughout, or sometimes they might feel a little down, in which case you might want to modify the movements. You might want to do, instead of doing full snatches, you do power snatches, or maybe you do power snatch from the blocks, something partial. And then there's some women who feel who feel really off at a certain time in the month, in which case, even doing the lifts is a tough task, and you might just need to do some bodybuilding, even some machine work on the body, for bodybuilding, just to get a training stimulus, but without creating a large systemic stress. So
are you? Yeah,
every woman is different. So again, that's something that you just have to talk about with your athletes. But
um,
when they're feeling good, women can do more than men. They
sure.
take longer to build up, but they can sustain a high level, and that's why, I think, at least in China, the women are better than the men. Like, the women are more successful. They have better technique. They win more medals. And a lot of it is because they're able to do more practice.
Okay.
Mhm.
The your your the training and the accessory work. When we talk about the load management, when we talk about the hyper specialization, we were talking about even Abhijayev just before, the Bulgarian training method. What's your point of view now on the accessory work? And do you get some favorite movement that you're going to pinpoint to the athlete, or it depends of the broad spectrum of what the athlete show to you when he's lifting?
Yeah, so to me, it depends on that broad spectrum of what the lift looks like.
Mm,
So, I look at the lift, and then I say, okay, what do we need to improve this lift? So, just to give you an example, people like to use box jumps. They like plyometric work, right?
yeah.
For the lifts. But when I look at plyometric work, I look at, does the athlete need help producing force, or do they need assistance in absorbing force? Because some athletes, let's go back to a squat. They can squat really deep, but they have a hard time standing up. Other athletes, they go down very slowly. They can't go very deep, but they can stand up very explosively. So yes, you want to stand up explosively during these lifts, but if you are slow to go down, then you're always going to do power snatch or power clean. You're going to have a difficult time doing the full lifts. So that athlete is going to need help in absorbing force and yielding the connective tissues. So if I were doing plyometrics for that kind of athlete, I would want to focus more on, jumping off the box and landing, focusing on making the landing or accentuating the landing as well, so that that downward force is magnified, so that they can expand the connective tissues, because those athletes tend to have very stiff connective tissues, and that's why they have a hard time going down.
Okay.
For the other, for the athletes who are very, they look very flexible, they can reach their butt can reach almost the ground when they squat. Those athletes have no problem yielding to catch. Those athletes, if they were doing plyometrics, they need to focus more on jumping to a box, producing force. Because if you focus on their landing, eventually they're going to hit the ground. They're going to, which, in weightlifting can create a missed lift, or it can create a situation where they catch the bar, but then they can't stand up. So, it's, you have to look at the individual before you go and prescribe certain exercises. So in the case of plyometrics, if you need help producing force, I would recommend a lot more box jumps, using an arm swing to help elevate the body, unweight the body, so that you can produce force more quickly. Whereas if you tend to be a stiffer individual or slower individual, I would focus more on jumping off the box, doing more like a depth jump, magnifying the downward arm swing during the landing as well, so that you can expand the connective tissues in the landing, and then that will help you receive, go down, relax yourself a bit more so that you can go down easier.
Like throwing the slam ball or something on the way, just to make you faster at the speed or where you're going to land, and then use your body to use more the tendons, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's another strategy. Or going back to Louis Simmons, we can do a box squat. So for example, the athletes who are able to go down very deep and have a hard time standing, if they do a box squat, you want to do a touch and go, because you don't want them to sit on the box for a long time, because if they yield, it's going to be very difficult for them to stand up. The other athlete who is very stiff, you want them to get on the box and you want them to sit there for a few seconds. You want them to yield. You want them to absorb that force. They have no trouble standing up. Their issue is being able to unload themselves, to yield onto the box. That way they can get lower. And then eventually you want to decrease the height of the box, so that they train themselves to avoid stiffening up too much too soon, so that they can get a deeper squat and a faster squat. So, whether you're using a ball, whether you're using a box squat, whether you're using a plyometric, it depends on, does the athlete need to produce force or absorb force? And that makes it a lot more simple.
Yeah. And when you are guessing that, are you guessing that to the max lift?
Well, like I said, I look at the technique of the lift. You look at how they're producing force, what the lift looks like, and then you go from there.
Okay. Because I assume that all the lifters are okay with the techniques, as long as it stay under the 90% lift, like. And maybe it's my my bias. Maybe it's my point of view. I'm not in the good area when I'm talking about that, but thinking about people that repeat and repeat and repeat that pattern of movement, I'm like, maybe you just can expect them to show some weaknesses after the 90% max lift.
Well, once you get to a certain threshold, yes, you're going to start seeing some compensatory strategies. But when you're dealing with those strategies, you have to consider when they occur, Does it only occur at the heavy weights, or does it occur early on?
Okay.
If it occurs early on, then that's something that you might want to fix
Before
so that
before to get into trouble. Yeah.
because it's only going to get worse. But if it's something that you only see at the heaviest loads, then that's something that it might be the way they're able to maximize their force. Then you need to consider the ability of the athlete. So, is this a high level lifter or is this an amateur lifter? If it's a high level lifter, then this might be their own style, their own quirk in technique that allows them to do something special, such as lifting a world record weight.
Sure.
So you always have to take into account the context of what you're looking at. If it was if you just have a blind recommendation for everybody, then it becomes it might work sometimes and it might not the other time. But if you
like a dogma.
But if you understand the principles, and what's happening, then you can adjust. It's like cooking. If you ask me, should I add salt to a soup? Well, maybe. Depends. Are there other ingredients there that are salty? Did I already add enough salt? It depends. So,
sure.
And then you look at you look at the dish, you look at how it looks, maybe you give it a taste, and then you adjust from there. So lifting is similar.
Okay. Talking about because we're nearly done. I'm looking at the time. Do you get another example of what you are working on with girls and boys on techniques? Like you were showing some few stories last week. One was about the torque at the shoulder, and the previous one was about, I think, clothing leaves clue. That's the one you tagged me in. Could you explain one of them to us?
Sure. So let me show you an example as well to the squat that I was talking about. Just one moment so that it's clear for people. So can you see this this photo, these two girls?
Yeah.
These are the same weight class, same weight, same competition day. And you can see that two different squats, right? Yeah. So you can see the girl on the left, she has a very good upright position. She has what a lot of people would say is a good alignment in the lower extremity. Whereas the girl on the right, we can see a lot more compensatory strategies. She's much deeper. Okay, we can see that there's a lot more internal rotation happening in the leg. We can see that there's a lot more compression in the thorax with her lowering her head. So this is an athlete that is squeezing much harder to do the same weight than this girl. So if we look at these two examples, this person is working harder and needs more assistance in force production because she's squeezing harder. She's really good at getting under the bar, going deep. And we can see that in the depth of her squat, but she also needs more force to try to stop that. This girl cannot go as deep, but she can squeeze herself enough to stop herself. So going back to the squatting example, the girl on the right is somebody who would need to do a touch and go on the box squat, whereas the girl on the left, if I wanted her to get deeper, would be somebody who needs to yield longer, who needs to pause on the box so that she could, learn to relax or expand the connective tissues and achieve a different depth, a lower depth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, and that's super interesting to at least.
So, but again, both, we can say, oh, these are both snatches. It's true, but you have to understand what you're looking at and then make the adjustment from there. So again, this person on the right, would need to do plyometrics, focusing on jumping to the box or unweighting herself to go to the box. This girl on the left needs to jump off the box or do the medicine ball example that you described earlier, things that help her go down, things that help her expand um, the connective tissues so that she can achieve a lower depth. So let me go to your example. And then, let's see. Okay. So one of the things I was looking at, that I've been looking at as well, is just, noticing different compensatory strategies among different lifters. So in this case, what I was looking at is is what's going on at the elbow. So a lot of people will look at this and say that her arm is bent, that it's maybe a press out of some sort. And they would say that, she needs more tricep work, right? But in reality, this is a twist. So what's happening is her arm, so she was like this, but what she's doing is that her arm is actually turned this way, inward, further. Okay. And if you look at what's happening here at my elbow, it looks like, from here, it looks more straight, but then from here, you can see, oh, it looks more bent.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Especially as I go overhead, it starts looking more bent, even though, if you look at it from here, it's straight. So what's happening is that she is rotating, she's internally rotating more in on this side. So it's not a function, it's not that that she needs more tricep work. If anything, she's compressing even more in this space. And what she needs to do is expand posteriorly so that she can avoid this situation. But she's getting pushed forward on that left side, and this is the result. But again, if you only look at it from, if you only blame muscles, if you only start focusing on muscles, or if you only look at it from a straight plane perspective, you're going to get a different result. Like I said, this arm is not bent; it's straight. In fact, with her, it's hyperextended, but it's a twist, it's a turn. So, and then what I was doing with this particular photo was looking at different structures, different activity in the pelvis, and trying to draw conclusions with what is happening in the upper extremity.
Yeah.
So
just for people to understand, so now you're looking at where start the rotation, looking at the uneven hips.
Yes. So, because basically what's happening at the hips is also happening at the shoulder.
Yeah.
So, and so I've been looking at patterns of what's happening in the lower extremity, and then looking at patterns in the upper extremity. And again, that's more level 2 stuff, but it helps with your training interventions, because maybe in this situation, she, you might, prescribe some tricep work and nothing ever happens. I might try to turn her to undo this twist, but if I only focus on the upper extremity and I ignore what's happening down here, I might not get the result that I need. But at least now I have a better perspective, or more informed perspective about where to go, rather than blaming certain muscles, or or saying that she's got a weakness, because she's 45 kilos and this is a 90 or 70. This is a good snatch. It's a heavy snatch.
Yeah.
So for her body weight. So so that's what I was looking at. And then when it came to the clothing example that you were referencing, let me pull that up real quick. So here, can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. So this is a good example of what I was talking about earlier in terms of the straight plane thinking and whatnot. So first off, I asked which lift do you think will have a more stable catch? I know it's a difficult question because this is a screenshot of the entire lift, but we do have a lot of clues in what we see. So first off, most of the people who voted on this said that the right photo will have a more stable catch. The answer is that the left will have a more stable catch. And so one of the clues that we can look at is what's going on here at the knee. So people will look at this and they'll say, "Oh, well, look, the leg looks bigger in this photo." You know, so if the muscle looks big, it must be that he's, you know, producing force, you know, or he's stronger. And the problem is that you know, the muscle is expanded, okay, but you know, when you produce force, you are compressing a muscle. Your muscle is not getting bigger when you contract, or you know, when you compress it. Actually, you know, it gets harder and it gets compressed. So when you look at, for example, you know, your biceps, you know, it's here, but as you flex, you know, you can see it does shorten and it bundles here, and then, you know, so it technically is compressing in that position. So here he's actually he's actually not producing force, he's creating space, right? So the wrinkle, you know, whenever you see wrinkles in clothing, a lot of times that's a clue to indicate that you are producing force. Otherwise, you're pushing against the clothing, you're expanding. So in this case, this knee is turned out too much.
Okay.
And so if the knee is creating space, it's not he's not able to produce force. So where is he producing the force? So one of the things that we can look at is that if you can imagine this, if you're in this position, if you turn your knee out, your foot is going to want to follow, right? So you're going to be on the lateral aspect of your foot, but he knows not to do that. So he's trying to keep his foot on the ground and maintain his foot contact, but the knee is still moving out in this direction. So how is he able to keep his foot on the ground while this is happening and not, you know, go on the lateral edge? Yeah. One of the things that we can see with the clothing here is that he lifts his heel. So you can see there's a gap here on the heel, whereas you don't see that in this shoe, on the shoe on the left. So what he's doing is that he's pronating his foot further. But if you look at how you walk, if you keep continuing to pronate your foot, eventually the heel comes off the ground.
Yeah.
That's how we walk. So he's doing the same thing. So instead of being able to produce force through the rest of the upper extremity, because that knee is moving out, that leg is moving out, he's got to produce more force in the foot to try to lift this weight. But there's a constraint. And so something has to change. So what he changes is the orientation of the foot, and the heel comes off the ground. And what that does is that's going to push you forward. And you know, in weightlifting, if you're forward too much, it's going to be difficult to do this lift. And there's other clues here in the clothing. So you can see that if you look at the shirt, you can see that the chest is more expanded. Yeah. You can see that the shirt is bigger on the left compared to the right. Okay. And that is because, just like we talked about, when you compress the muscle, it's going to get smaller. So he's really compressing his rib cage. He's squeezing with his chest, you know, with his pecs to hold on to this weight, and so that he can control his torso. But when you squeeze the thorax, you know, fluid will travel upward. It's like squeezing a water bottle from the front and the back. And so when that happens, you tend to get shoulder elevation. So you can see he's got a little bit of a shrug happening here, and his arms are bent more compared to this position. So we know in weightlifting, if you bend your arms, that's going to make this lift much more difficult. So just by looking at the clothing, you know, you can see where he's creating space, where he's producing force. And you know, again, it's like people will see the wrinkles here and think, oh, there's weakness happening here. Oh, there's nothing happening. But honestly, this wrinkle here is showing that he is pushing that leg into the ground. He's not trying to push it out and create space.
Yeah. Well, when you say creating space, that's he's pushing the knees too far out. So you see that shear force happen at the knees nearly.
Yeah, it's just anytime
one
you
segment
move,
is going there and one segment is want to go in into that direction.
yeah, so you can, you think about your arms. If you move your arms outward, you're creating space for you to move into, right? If I bring my arms in, okay, now there's very little space for me to move into, okay, and I'm also compressing a lot of the musculature in the thorax. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, or I open my hand. Here I'm creating a space for me to do something like hold a ball or hold a barbell. Okay. But if I only open my hand this much, I'm limited in what I can hold on to. I'm limited in how much force I can produce. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, there's, and how much space depends on what you're trying to do. But those are the two strategies that we have as humans. We either create space or, we close the space by compressing it, by producing force. So in this case, so this athlete, again, people will look at his leg and the leg looks bigger. So people say, oh, it looks bigger. That means it's stronger. But what the clothing shows here is that he is not producing sufficient force. And the rest of the clothing shows that he's transferring that force into other areas, in this case, the foot and at the chest. And then you can see other things like the arm bend and a little bit of the shrug. So, it just, it's just a fun way for me to see, what people are thinking and what their reasoning is. Sometimes I'll ask people, I'll see people who vote, and I'll ask them, why did they vote in this way, or what was their thinking and whatnot. Just to, for me, it just helps gather evidence and helps me refine this model of analysis. And so what I try to do with people is show them, how to look at the clothing, how to look at the orientation of the body, so that you can then create training recommendations to fix these things. So if we look at the actual lift, let me just pull it up real quick. So this is the lift from the ground. Okay, so if we look at it in slow motion, so basically what happens here is that you can see on the left, he stays over the bar as he's passing the knee, but on the right, you can see that he starts leaning back right here. He starts leaning back much further, while on the left, he's still staying forward. Can you see that?
Yeah.
You see the different angle in the torso. So he's already pulled too early in this lift. So, he needs to keep this leg out, because if he brings it in, he's going to fall forward. You can imagine if you were standing on the edge of a cliff and I tried to push you, where would you go? You would try to go like this to try to prevent yourself from falling forward. Does that make sense? Yeah. So he's doing the same thing here with his leg. He's trying to push it out because he's already pushed forward. He's like, I don't want to fall, so I need to create more space to avoid falling. Because if I don't have a space to move into, I'm going to fall. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So then what ends up happening is that he leans back to a lot. He's already reached the hip. The heels have come off the ground. And now he's got to lean back much harder to get the extension. And you can see that his pull is much longer on the left side. So he's able to maintain his balance. He's able to create a longer pull. That's going to create more time for the bar to accelerate and get more, and that's what's going to help it achieve a greater height. Whereas here, he had to shorten the pull, and that's what's going to create more instability in the catch. So he's able to make both lifts. But what happens here is as you can see right here, he starts rocking backwards
Yeah.
like this. Whereas on the left, he maintains position. Whereas here, I don't know if you can see, there's a little bit of an arm bend, a little bit of a rotation. What we would say is an arm. Most people would say is an arm bend. It's a twist, but there's a twist happening here, and then he rocks back as well in the catch. Okay, so all of that instability happened much earlier, and the clothing leaves the clues. So now, so in the level one, I don't go into this. I talk about how to keep your balance, how to pull, what timing you need to follow. But for the so that happens in the level one. For the level two, though, we do talk about clothing. We do talk about how to interpret what we normally see in the body. Again, we try to go away from straight plain thinking, because that will clarify a lot of the compensatory strategies that we see in weightlifting. It's fun.
And yeah, and I think people need to understand that this level of thinking about lifting, about compression expansion model, creating space, creating power to a sticking point. I think that's your value over there. You're not just selling a position with the bar and just jump and land. You're creating a system that fits into something in slow motion and in real life. And I like that, because you have the ability to talk to us about what you look at and why.
Well, it simplifies things. So, for example, I've always, when I look at PTs, I tend to get confused about the shoulder, and they talk about, if you look at traditional interpretations of the scapula and how it moves, you have upward rotation, downward rotation, you have adduction, abduction, you have vertical move, you have protraction, retraction, and things like that. But it's very difficult. In fact, I think it's quite impossible to isolate those movements, because they don't occur independently. They when you breathe, the scapula is doing all of these movements. It's going, it is elevating. It is, it is upwardly rotating. It's doing a lot of these movements, and it's very hard to isolate just one of those and say, this is what's happening. Yeah. So, but I think, if you fall into that kind of thinking, that planar thinking, it creates a lot of confusion. And then and I know it creates confusion, because when I post these questions up, I'll ask people like, how much, what do you think of shoulder flexion or whatnot? A lot of times the answer is 50-50, or it's just not correct. So I'll give you one more example. I know we've been it's been long, but let me just show you another poll that I put out there. So this one, I was asking people, which athlete has more shoulder flexion? So most people guessed that this left athlete has more shoulder flexion, probably because, you can see that the bar is behind him more. You can see that there's that the angle of the forearm is pointing back. And so a lot of people are going to interpret that as him really moving the arm back and whatnot. But what's happening is we can also see that, he's really, he's compensating through the thorax here. Wow. You see, he's really arched in the thorax. And if you were to flatten the thorax so that he looks more like this athlete here, then his arms would actually be more in front. You can just imagine. So like if my arms are about this high, right, about this much, and then I arch, I can raise my arm in this position and make it look like I'm overhead, right? But if I reduce the arch in the thorax, then the arm falls. Yeah. And that's kind of what's happening in this case here. And you can see that there's a twist, a greater twist here at the elbow, compared to this athlete here. And that's another compensatory strategy for him to do that. Now, is this something that you want to fix? Well, again, it depends on the context. These are high level lifters. For me, I would ask, is this athlete winning? Is this athlete hurting? Does he have any pain in it? Does he have elbow pain? Or does he have shoulder pain? And then if that's the case, then that's something where I would want to manage. I might not be able to make him look like this athlete because he's been lifting for a long time. He's experienced, but I can make it better. I can make it so that he is not holding back just because he feels pain, or we can manage the strategy so that he doesn't miss the lift as much, because that matters as well. Sometimes, it's not always the athlete that has the heavier attempt. It's the athlete who makes the lift that wins. So again, people will look at where the bar is and they say, oh yeah, look at this, look at this awesome shoulder flexion. Look how far it is behind, but they ignore what's happening, below. And so again, in level 2, I teach people how to look at these lifts and then how to perform accessory movements so that you can do this. So if he does a back squat where he's arching his back really hard, and that's what he's going to do, then that's reinforcing that strategy. So that might be a time where I say, okay, listen, instead of doing this, maybe we do more front squats, because you can't arch like this and try to perform a front squat. You won't go anywhere. The front squat requires you to flatten a bit more, to compress a bit more anteriorly, so that you can and requires more space in the front and in the back, so that you can stay more upright. So for those two athletes, I might say, okay, the one who was compensating a lot might need more front squats, and then the guy who was more aligned and had no issue, he can do more back squats, so that he can increase his force production, his leg strength. So again, it's not that front squats are better. It's not that back squats are bad. It's just, if you look at the shape, you can make more targeted recommendations to increase your success rate. Because if we're all looking at this at a photo and all we're getting is 50%, where half of the people say one thing and the other half say the other thing, you're just flipping a coin. In those cases, you might as well just guess. So you have an athlete, you flip a coin, you say, okay, today we're doing back squats. Might as well, because if you train with somebody else, maybe they say front squats. Who cares? So I want to help people make better decisions and increase the rate of their success. So that's my goal.
Hope that people gonna understand the chance that we have, that you are coming in France. You are coming on the 25th, 26th of March to L'Arène CrossFit Nakama. Yeah, L'Arène CrossFit Nakama. It's in Paris. It's nearby Paris. You can access to RRC for the French guys, and easy. You can get by car, by scooter, whatever you want. You can also access by ligne Metro 14. I will give the plan for people who need. But that's going to be a great seminar, and sure, you can already search for date for the level 2, because after people looking at that, they need to prepare for the next seminar. They need to get themselves ready for it.
Yeah. So the level 2, as you can see, it's more analysis, and so it's more for people who are coaches, for people who are interested in becoming more successful coaches, and for people who who feel like they're maybe stuck in their coaching. So because what happens when you hit a constraint? What happens when you do the mobility work that you see on Instagram and it doesn't work? What do you do? You need to have a plan. So I help people create that plan. So the level 1 is for athletes and coaches, but the level 2 is more for coaches.
Great. So hope that's going to be a great seminar. Hope to see you there. Do you get any things to say to that French coach and French athletes wants to come to your seminar?
So the seminar will have French translation, so that'll be good. Because if I try to speak French, nobody will come. So even though I'll be teaching in English, there will be French translation, and then people can ask questions as well. So the communication is not an issue. Language is not an issue. So if you're not confident in your English, don't worry. I'm not confident in my French, but we're all going to work together.
Okay,
it'll be good.
That's good. Great. I think we are done with the podcast. I want to say thank you because you give us so many information. You give us a lot of videos of analysis. You give us a lot of your time, and really appreciate that time with you. That was great, and even the time we had before. So thanks a lot for that podcast, and hope to see you in France soon.
Yeah, I love this stuff. I love teaching this stuff. So I put my time into it, and I enjoy it as well. So, and I'm looking forward. This first time in France.
Yeah, sure. We're gonna make you visit the best restaurant and best wine.
Sounds good.
Wine and cheese.
Can't wait. Great.
Thanks a lot, Manuel. See you soon.
See you.